The African continent is probably going to end up becoming the location of the most important demographic event of the 21st century. Today, the population of Africa already accounts for roughly 17% of the human population, the second highest of any continent after Asia, which represents almost 60% of the humanity. However, Africa's population is growing significantly faster than anywhere else in the world is right now, and by the end of the century, it is estimated that Africa will by then be home to roughly 40% of the human population, while Asia will by then be home to only 43%. The 21st century is going to be largely defined by the rise of the Africa, but the continent faces several serious challenges to overcome in its rise to global prominence, and one of the biggest of these problems is desertification. Desertification is essentially defined as the degradation of land such that it is no longer productive for useful things, such as agriculture. Land can only provide so much, and if the demand is too great, then it cannot satisfy the needs of the population. Especially in the 21st century, the pressure is ever increasing on dryland ecosystems across the world for providing goods such as food, fuel, building materials, and water that human needs to survive and economies need to thrive. As the pressure to provide these resources for the world's rapidly expanding population increases coupled with growing threats of global climate change, drylands across the world are experiencing more soil erosion than ever, and thus an inability for the land to retain water or ever regrow plants again. So while yes, the term does bring to mind the windswept sand dunes of the Sahara, it's important to remember that this term reaches far beyond just those living in and around the world's deserts. If we take a look at the world at large, you can see that drylands cover roughly 38% of the Earth's total land area and cover much of North and South Africa, Western North America, Australia, the Middle East, and the Central Asia. And all of these areas are home to roughly 2.8 billion people across the world today. But the major concern is not just that soil degradation is happening, but the increasing pace at which it is happening. What used to take 30 years to degrade is now happening in just a single year, leading many to worry about what these expanding population growths will do in these regions over the next century, possibly forcing them to migrate elsewhere. It is now of such a concern that the United Nations even has a special convention, the Convention to Combat Desertification, or UNCCD, that regularly meets, and it's comprised of 122 countries, each committing to land degradation targets. Now focusing back in on Africa, as we first discussed, it is home to the world's third largest desert after both Antarctica and the Arctic, which of course are both technically considered deserts as they receive far less than 250 millimeters of annual precipitation. But what we are focusing on here is the Sahara Desert. This colossal desert, which comprises much of northern Africa, covers some 9.2 million square kilometers and spans roughly 3,000 miles from coast to coast. Right below this vast pile of sand is a region known as the Sahel. It is tucked between the Sahara in the north and the Sudanian savanna to the south. Here some 135 million people live their lives. But what is troubling is the increasing desertification in the region, which is essentially pulling the Sahara Desert south. In fact, over the last 100 years alone, the Sahara Desert has grown by 10%, and much of that growth has been in this southward direction. The fear is that if nothing is done, the Sahara will continue to expand and thus essentially wipe out this entire region and push even further into Central Africa. And the worst thing is that this is expected to affect a ton of people. While today the population of the Sahel is a lot at 135 million, it is expected that by 2050, the population could grow to as much as 340 million or more, or roughly what the United States population is today. And without any productive land to grow food on or to sustain a decent life, a spiraling cycle of even worse poverty than the Sahel currently experiences will quickly emerge. And this is actually already sort of happening. For instance, over the past couple of decades, this issue has already fueled severe food and water shortages, which in turn have caused recurring military conflicts over these declining resources, and thus forced migration to better and more prosperous areas. One of these resources, the premier lake in the region, Lake Chad, has shrunk to incredibly low levels in the recent years. which has historically been an extremely important body of water for countries like Chad, Cameroon, Nigeria, and Niger, has seen its levels shrink to less than 10% of what they once were when the lake was at full capacity, meaning that the 30 million or so people who rely upon this lake each and every year are under serious threat of losing their entire water supply in the face of this massive challenge. However, many communities, scientists, and politicians have begun looking at long-term solutions. But finally, in 2007, under the leadership of the African Union, countries across the region took a bold first step at solving this problem by unveiling their plans for what has become known as the African Great Green Wall. The plan is essentially build a wall across the entire southern edge of the Sahara Desert, all the way from Senegal in the west to Djibouti in the east, all in hopes of blocking the Sahara's continued relentless march south. And this is not just any wall, because it's a wall completely made out of trees, which once complete will make it the world's largest man-made natural wonder. It will be about 3 times as large as the Australian Great Barrier Reef. Once constructed, the wall will be 4,800 miles long and be roughly 10 miles wide through most of its paths, which is about the same distance as a wall from Portugal all the way to Mongolia would be. The estimated cost of constructing such a titanic structure is believed to be around $8 billion. However, it's a small price to pay, because in the end, it could transform the lives of millions of Africans who see themselves on the very front line in the climate change. And this is not even the first time that this type of project has been undertaken. Similarly, both China and India have undertaken or considering a green wall of their own that would aid in blocking the expanding Gobi Desert and Thar Desert respectively. The project in the Sahel is being spearheaded by the African Union, but it's also being helped out by many other organizations, like the United Nations as well as several other countries around the world, with the hopes of completing the wall by 2030. And once completed, not only could it stop the Sahara from expanding, but the amount of CO2 that all of these new trees could absorb will also provide a great bonus benefit as well. It will be equivalent to the entire state of California keeping all of its automobiles powered for 3.5 years. But this project alone is not enough to save this region, or for that matter, all other regions across the world facing a similar crisis. In addition to this, we as a species have to begin taking better care of our environment too. Decades of overgrazing, climate change-induced droughts, and poor farming practices are stripping not only the Sudanian grasslands of their once fertile topsoil, but hundreds of other regions like it across the world. But what is also needed is to allow for regions to recharge their water tables and create the microclimates necessary to thrive, so that vegetation can flourish. For instance, countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are adopting a practice of fencing off large areas of land to allow it to recover from the effects of overgrazing. Likewise, in agricultural areas, farmers are being taught to plant around existing trees and vegetation rather than just plowing over them as far as the wall itself is concerned. There is a long way to go with just over a decade left to meet the goal. The project is currently only 15% complete, with the most significant gains in the Senegal with over 11 million trees planted, Nigeria with 4.9 million, and Ethiopia with 15 million. However, there is so much work left to do. Some of the delays have been due to fundings, but a lot of it is also just the sheer level of manpower required to plant so many trees. But the stakes could not be higher anymore, with what could be over 300 million people living in the Sahel after the next 3 decades. It is now more important than ever to save this land from falling beneath the sands. For if not, a mass migration could occur unlike the likes we have ever seen before. Well, that's it for today's video. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And also don't forget to comment on what should we cover next.